In the next two units, I want to talk about two industries that are relatively small compared to agriculture, but I think they're important and that they show how Taiwanese did business during the Japanese era. The first industry I want to talk about is mining. There's two important types of mining in Taiwan. One is gold mining, the other one was coal mining. Now, I'm not going to really say much about coal mining just for lack of time. But you should know that Taiwanese business people were interested in opening coal mines. The Japanese did some of this, Taiwanese also did some of this. And this remains an important industry into the 1960s and 70s. Gold mining is what I want to concentrate on. In the next two sections, I'm going to talk about gold mining. Gold rushes, what do you think about a gold rush? If you're an American, like I am, you think of California, 1849, the 49ers, okay, coming to California when they find gold at Sutter's Mill. Okay. The interesting thing here is that about the time that the East Coast Americans got to California in this gold rush, at just about the same time, the Chinese get there too. It's amazing how quickly the Chinese reacted. And it's not just all Chinese, it was mainly people from Guangdong province, the Cantonese. Okay? They're the ones that are by far the most important miners in these gold rushes. And this is just the first gold rush. There's other gold rushes in the United States and also a silver rush or two, in places like Nevada, Oregon. You go up into Canada. There's gold rush in Canada. There's gold rush in Australia. There's a gold rush in South Africa. Okay, so there's many gold rushes in the last half of the 19th century. Okay, and all of these gold rushes, Chinese get involved. Okay, they react quickly, and what I'm saying is, this is kind of surprising. You don't see Southeast Asians rushing off to California. You don't see Indians rushing off to California. You don't see Arabs or Persians rushing off to California. Okay, you see some Europeans, Americans, and Chinese. Okay, those are the groups of people that react to these gold finds. Okay? And that's kind of interesting, that the Chinese would boldly rush out here into countries that they knew nothing about and start trying to find gold. Maybe this comes from experience they've had in Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, Chinese often got involved in mining, earlier on. So maybe this is one of the reasons this is happening. Okay? But Chinese rush off to these gold rushes. Okay? Here's some picture of Chinese. Most of the Chinese that came over were sojourners. That means they weren't really immigrants that wanted to stay. They hoped to just make some money, make a lot of money if possible, and then go back home. Okay, it was just some place they were just out for the money and they were homesick. They wanted to get home as soon as they could. Usually they were just men. Often they had to borrow money. Okay, so many of the Chinese were indentured laborers. They came over with these indentured contracts because there'd be a Chinese company. Several rich Chinese would form a company. The Chinese laborers could not afford a boat ticket to get all the way over to California, so the company would pay for that boat ticket. When the Chinese got to California, they would have to then work and gradually use part of their income to pay off their debts. Okay? And until they paid off the debts, the company had a lot of control over them. Okay? They couldn't just go and do whatever they wanted. Indentured servitude like this was actually illegal in the United States at this time, though the United States had used it a lot earlier, before, back in the colonial period. But this was one reason that Chinese were often attacked by the labor unions. Okay, they didn't like the idea that these Chinese had signed indentures. Okay? There's other reasons though as well. The Chinese would go out and they would set up camps near places that looked likely for gold, and they would start panning for the gold. That's what you do, just try to find the gold. You put the sand from the bottom of the river in your pan, you slosh it around. The sand kind of gets in with the water and sloshes out. The gold nuggets are heavier. They go to the bottom. They don't slash out. So you can usually find if there's gold, where you're looking, by looking at what's left after you slosh out the sand. Okay? That's not, though, how you really gather much gold. If you decide an area does have good gold, then you start using a cradle. And you can see, I mean, the big picture shows a Chinese carrying a cradle. Down here at the bottom, this is a picture of a Chinese using a cradle. This is a relatively small cradle. What you do though is you collect the sand from the river that you think might have gold in it. You pour it in the cradle. Underneath the cradle is the bottom is something kind of like a washboard, with a lot of little slits in it. And that's for the gold nuggets to get stuck in. And then you pour lots of water over the cradle. This Chinese man seems like he's only got a small kind of bucket to pour the water over. Some operations are much bigger than this with a much nicer flow of water. But you gradually use the water to get rid of all the sand, and then the gold nuggets should be stuck at the bottom of the cradle. Of course, if you can find where the gold is coming from originally, that's when you really get rich. And to do that, you have to dig into the mountainsides. Now, the Chinese run into problems. Okay, the Chinese in the gold fields, okay, they're competing with Americans and Europeans who don't like the competition. Okay? So there's fighting. Okay, there's some Chinese get killed. It's a violent, lawless place out there in the gold fields. So Chinese are out there trying to find gold, but they also have to try to protect themselves. Most people, of course, never get rich off of gold. It's been remarked, at least I know in the California gold rush, usually the gold seekers don't get rich. Okay, usually the people who get rich are the people that stayed back in, say, San Francisco and serviced the gold seekers. Because the gold seekers were desperate for things like food and equipment, and you could sell those at huge profits. Okay, well, the Chinese also discovered this, and many Chinese end up working, laboring in places like San Francisco and making money this way. Western workers hated the Chinese. When you read about why, it's very similar to what you find in Southeast Asia in the 20th century. The complaint, isn't that the Chinese are inferior or anything. It's quite the opposite. They think they're unfair competition. They say the Chinese work too hard. They also say they save too much and consume too little, so we don't get any business from them. And their savings, that's all sent back to China, so we never see it. Okay? So American workers are making the same sort of complaints that the Southeast Asian workers often made when they were faced with Chinese competition. Western workers, sometimes they would get violent. Okay, and I think this is in one of the big fights they had in the gold fields. You would have the Chinese getting massacred sometimes. What happens is that the American workers don't like the Chinese because they work too hard. Okay, they want to save their money. They don't spend much. But that's just what capitalists want. Okay, that's what the business class was. They were happy to get this type of worker. So eventually, Chinese in the United States, they start moving into the big mines that are being run by big businesses. Okay, the big businesses love Chinese labor. Okay? Now these are now the laborers are just making wages. They're not going to hit it rich in a gold mine, but the wages are good, and it draws the Chinese in. And then of course the capitalists have to try to protect their labor force, okay, from being attacked by jealous American laborers. Chinese go all over the world. This is a picture of Chinese working alongside African and European labor in South Africa. Okay, so Chinese get a reputation for being skilled in gold mines, and they're used all over the world. One of the stories that Americans all know about Chinese labor is that many of the laborers, when they are important in the transcontinental railroad. Okay? It was mainly Chinese labor that built the western half of the transcontinental railroad. This is another use that the Chinese, they made good wages, they were willing to work hard, and so the company decided that they were better labor than they could get elsewhere. Eventually, though, Chinese are shut out of the country because businessmen like them, but businessmen are a small minority. Okay, the labor unions are working hard to keep Chinese out, and workers are the majority. It's a democracy. Okay? This is an example of a cartoon in a business periodical. Okay, this business periodical is complaining that the Chinese are being shut out. Okay, shows the gates of liberty shut the Chinese, and there's a sign that says, "Notice communists, nihilists, socialists, Fenian, and hoodlum welcome, but no admittance to Chinamen." Okay, and the Chinese, they're bringing in order and industry. Okay, so the business people thought that really the Chinese were a better workforce. They didn't really like some of the riffraff they were getting from Europe. Okay. But, again, it's a democracy, and the laborers, the American laborers, they had a lot of votes. They managed to shut the gates on the Chinese. Chinese, throughout until World War II, most Chinese aren't allowed in the United States. There's exceptions, if you're a merchant or if you're a scholar, if you've got a university degree, you can get into the United States. Okay, but for most Chinese that just want a job, working as a laborer, okay, the door is closed. Okay, and it's only after World War II that the door starts opening. So you've got a lot of Chinese that have experience in gold mining. Okay, and they've been shut out of much of the world, not just the United States, but they're shut out of Australia and most places. Okay? But they're not shut out of Taiwan. Okay? What happens in Taiwan is that Liu Mingchuan, he was the Qing Dynasty era reformer. He was trying to do economic reforms in Taiwan. He decided one of the things he wanted to do was build a railroad. They were building the railroad. They were building a bridge across the Keelung River, kind of in between Keelung, the port, and Taipei, the new capital. And the workers on the bridge, many of them were Chinese from the mainland. And one of the workers had experience in the gold fields. And crossing the Keelung River, building a bridge, he looks down one day and he sees the sparkle, and he knows that's gold. Okay. Now, I've never found any records of who these people are, but usually it is the people from Guangdong, okay, the Cantonese, that are the ones that are migrating abroad and looking for gold. And so he was probably a Cantonese. He goes down, he and his friends, they quit their job building bridges, and they decide they're going to find gold. Okay? And word gets out, and Taiwan is suddenly flooded by Chinese seeking gold. Okay? It's not so much people from Taiwan. I haven't heard that the Taiwanese themselves got so much involved in this. It seems to mainly be mainland migrants coming over, trying to find the gold. And my guess would be they're mainly from Guangdong, though I haven't found real strong proof of this. But there's this rush of fortune seekers. Okay, if you look at the Keelung River, it's been described that it was the Keelung River becomes just crowded. People are living on boats. They're building little lean-to shacks, and they're living on the shacks on the shores. They spend their day waiting out there in the water, kind of fighting over turf, trying to stake out places where they think maybe there'll be gold, panning, cradling. Okay, looking to get rich. Okay. Well, this is chaos. And governments don't like chaos. The Taiwan government didn't like this. Okay, so the Taiwan government went through 3 stages. The first stage, it just forbid people from looking for gold. I don't think that lasted too long because it just didn't work. Okay, if there's gold out there, people wanted to find it. Okay, and so people just ignored the government, and the government had a hard time enforcing their policy. Well, if you can't stop something, at least you can tax it. So the second step was the Taiwan government decided we're going to tax these gold seekers. I think the tax was something, a certain amount per day per person if it was a man, and then it was they had a lower fee if it was a woman or a child. This doesn't work really either, though. I don't know if it was the bureaucracy or the corruption, but it seems like the money the government was putting in collecting the tax didn't really wasn't really enough to just, the collection of the tax didn't really pay for pay for gathering the tax. Okay, the money was kind of leaking out somewhere. So the government tries policy 3, and this works. Okay, basically they say, okay, we're going to kind of sell the rights to look for the gold. There's a syndicate of business people, Chinese business people. I'm not sure whether they were mainlander or Taiwanese, but they bought this right, and this group of merchants. Well, the merchants, they knew they weren't going to stop people in the river from looking for gold, so they did like the government. They set up a tax. They said, okay, you can look in the river for gold if you pay a certain amount, and they enforced the tax. This was a business proposition for them. They enforced this tax much better than the government did, so they made money off of this. And then they used the money to hire experts to try to find, where is this gold coming from? Gold doesn't just appear in the river. It has to erode down from the mountains. There's two types of gold mines, okay? There's the original place where the gold comes from. That's usually with quartz crystal. Okay? So you find a lot of quartz crystal. Not all quartz crystal, but some quartz crystal has nuggets of gold in it. That's usually where the gold comes from to begin with. Sometimes, there's erosion, and the quartz erodes, and the gold erodes down into a riverbed. Then, as history, over thousands of years, the river dries up, and so you get deposits of gold underground that are secondary deposits. Okay, those are placer mines, where the gold wasn't originally from there, but gold is collected there just because of the geological history of the area. Well, they find some of the placer mines, and then I think it's about 1993 or so, they find Jiufen. Okay, and that's on the mountain where the gold comes from. Okay, and it's a mountain just kind of on the northeast coast of Taiwan. This is Jiufen today. Okay, it's really kind of a tourist town now. Some people might describe it as a tourist trap, but I think it's an interesting place to go through. And if you look from any view from Jiufen, maybe from out the restaurant windows, this is what you see below. Okay, that's some of the harbors near Geelong. Okay, so it's up on a mountain slope. There's several of these places around the world. Generally, villages are not put on mountain slopes. That's not a good place for a village. Okay? The only reason you almost ever put a village on a mountain slope is because there's mining there. Okay? I've been to places like in Mexico where they have these villages or towns on mountain slopes, and it's just due to the silver mines. Okay? Well, in Taiwan, it's the gold mine. Jiufen starts out as just a shanty town. Okay, built where the mines opened up. But gradually throughout the Japanese period, it becomes more and more built up, and then it started falling apart in the 1960s and 70s as the gold kind of played out, and government policies kind of turned against gold mining. Okay, but then it revived in the 1990s as a tourist town. Okay, so now it's really flourishing. In Jiufen, okay, what happens is the merchants that have found this place, they split up the property rights. Okay, they've got the rights to the gold. Basically, that's kind of the mineral rights. Okay, so they split up the place, and it may have been into 9 shares for all I know. Maybe that's where the name comes from. Jiufen actually means 9 shares. Okay, they dig really simple, labor-intensive mines. Their mines go straight down. Okay, that's they want to take the quickest way to get to the gold. If you had more time, you might want to build a mine you could walk into, kind of a horizontal mine. They want to get right to the gold. They just dig a hole straight down into the quartz formation. These are very narrow holes. Okay, so they don't even have a room really for a ladder. They tie together poles. Okay, and then they notch the poles. And you climb down the poles just with the notches. Okay? That's how the miners get down there. When you get down, you're talking about 100, 200 meters below the earth. Okay, and I think that's about the depth. Then they would start digging horizontal tunnels along with the quartz. Looking for the quartz. Okay, so they would find where the line of quartz was, and they would start digging it out, and the tunnel would follow that. It would be a vertical tunnel. Again, it's a very small tunnel. You can't stand up in it. You crawl on your hands and knees. Okay? You crawl to the end. You dig some stuff out. You put it in a bag. I think at some of these places you probably couldn't even turn around. You probably just crawled backward till you got to the shaft going down. They would lower a rope. You would tie your sack to it. They would pull up the quartz crystal you had dug out that hopefully has some gold in it. And then they would lower down another bag. You'd go back and you'd keep digging. Okay. If you're claustrophobic, this would be the most awful job in the world. Okay. It was really hard work. Okay. Once they get the ore up to the top, to the mouth of the mine, usually what would be done is they would just sell the ore to people who wanted to see if they could find gold. Okay, so there was no what we call vertical integration. Nowadays, you find the ore and then you process it yourself. In this case, they often just sold the ore to people who were willing then to get a mortar and pestle and kind of crush it and try to find the gold. So that was the earliest way they dug gold mines in Taiwan. A very simple process. It was very labor intensive, and basically they were using as little capital as they possibly could and as little organization as they could. Okay, they didn't even try to do they didn't try to find the ore and then wash the ore themselves. They split that up, so it's kind of like two different companies involved. Okay, that's how gold mining started in Taiwan. Okay. The next section, I want to describe how the Japanese continued mining gold in Taiwan and how the Taiwanese mined gold in Taiwan during the Japanese era. Okay, they did these in two very different ways, and both were profitable.